To start this discussion on loneliness, I wanted to first of all outline some general thoughts I have on it, including some statistics, and then I wanted to get into some of what I see as not necessary solutions, but things that can help you or help you help someone who you think might be struggling with loneliness. To start with, I wanted to lead with a statistic that I found when doing research for this show. And that was a survey done by Movember. I'm sure most people listening or watching are familiar with Movember. It encourages men to grow some kind of funky facial hair come November time to raise awareness for men's mental health. But anyway, they did a study that found that 1/3 of men say they have no close friends. And a follow-up from that was, how many people could you talk to about something serious? And 50% of people in the study said no one at all. So that could be a relationship issue or work issue. But quite shockingly, 50% of people said they had no one that they felt they could talk to about a serious subject. I think, to me anyway, those numbers are quite shocking. And perhaps that's just because I'm limited to the people I interact with. And it seems very high that 1/3 of men say they have no close friends, and 50% say they couldn't talk to someone about a serious issue. So my initial reaction is it's desperately sad, and why is that the case and what can be done about it? My next thought on loneliness, and like I say, that the first part of this is just going to be a general, just throwing ideas and thoughts out. But my next thought is that I think there's a very key distinction between being lonely and being alone. So the way I'd describe this is, I was someone, and I'll just use myself for examples throughout this episode because, well, it makes sense. But when I was at university, I had a good number of people I would say were friends. So in a physical sense, I wasn't very alone. I had loads of people around me, but I felt desperately, desperately lonely. And I think the key distinction is that loneliness is more an internal feeling, and being alone is more a physical, it's more of a physical thing. And you can certainly be one without the other, I think both ways. So for me these days, I spend a fair bit of time by myself. It's just kind of how my work lines up and just what I do. But I feel, I don't know what the opposite of alone is, but I've got a great support network, and I've got loads of people around me who I feel I can talk to about things. And so for that reason, I'm certainly more physically alone than I was at university, where I'd see loads of people on a daily basis, but felt very alone. Felt very lonely, sorry, I'm getting the terms confused. But these days, I certainly see less people than I did at university, but I feel much less lonely than I did. So I kind of botched the difference at the end, but hopefully you get the idea. I think it's quite an important distinction because I think in friendship groups, it's quite often difficult to see the people who are struggling. And I think, loneliness and general mental health issues, they can overlap a lot of the time. But you can be part of a big group, or I don't know. If you have a think of your friendship group, if you do have a larger one, there could be someone within that who you think, oh, he's got loads of friends, he's got X, Y, and Z. But that person may be feeling very lonely inside. So I think it's quite an important thing to identify. You don't have to be physically by yourself to feel very lonely. I think that's important to note, because perhaps some of the issues in identifying people that are lonely is because it's not immediately obvious from the outside. The next point I wanted to talk about in terms of the general chat about loneliness is specific for men. As I said, a fair few of these points would be, it's what I can relate to personally. Men tend to use joking as a defense mechanism. So there's a number of examples I can think of, but an apt one that me and my friends have or had I'll say, is that whenever anyone talked about, it is still funny, but there's got to be a limit to it. Whenever anyone talks about anything that was remotely about them or something they'd done, the classic response would be, "Did anyone ask?" And it would be funny. Like everyone would just laugh because it's like, oh. The more I look back at that, the more I think it's probably quite an unhealthy thing to develop because, sure, 80% of the time it was just, probably more, 95% of the time, it would be someone's done something during the day and everyone would be like, did anyone else? No one cares. Like you walk to the shop, have a medal. But I fear that having that enough of the time or saying that enough of the time will just lead people to think, okay, well, I've got this quite serious thing that I want to discuss. And these guys who are my friends, I'm worried they're just going to say, did anyone ask? So I think that's kind of a bit of a defense. Well, that can put people off. I think men like to joke about these things. And quite often when it comes to serious conversations, the joking kind of brings it back to a surface level. It means that it's not so intense because maybe we're ill-equipped on how to deal with those more serious conversations, which I think is understandable. It's not something you really learn at school. But what I loved actually is the other day, one of my friends in our group chat said, listen, enough of this. Did anyone ask? Nonsense. If you've had something that's gone well or you're doing something or whatever, I want to hear it. So I'm asking. And I love that. So that was something I think was real progress in that sense. So I'll move on to some potential solutions of what you can do a bit later on. But I think that's something that certainly men do. It's kind of downplay the seriousness of these things. And for that reason, people don't want to bring things up and talk about them because they're worried that either will get laughed at or it won't be taken seriously. I think another aspect of this is what loneliness slash depression looks like for men is different to women. And I don't want to particularly, well, I do want to, but I'm not certainly equipped enough to talk about a lot of issues that women face. And as I've said a number of times, I really do hope to get people on who can cover these conversations and give us a real insight as to some of those issues and what they are and how they can be dealt with or improved upon. But male depression, I think, can look very different and unique because men don't cry very much. I think they do probably more these days because there's been a movement towards accepting feelings and this being okay. But for a lot of men, and I can think of examples, I can kind of think of myself as an example, when they're depressed or lonely, they will either act out, so they'll be, physically violent, or maybe that's a bit extreme, but they'll do things like that. They'll drink a lot, which, and I'll get onto the issue in a second, but if we take those two things of acting out and drinking is something that perfectly healthy people do and people that are absolutely fine. So if you see, I don't know, a friend and he's just drinking quite a lot, the difference between that being, oh, he's actually quite depressed, or oh, he's just drinking a lot, it's difficult to see that difference. Personally, when I was really down and felt quite lonely, I would always, and it was a bit of a joke, and I feel kind of stupid saying this, but it's good. I feel that these conversations are good and they can help people. But when I would go out and drink, I would quite often get very upset when I was drinking. And I think that was because my real feelings about where I was at mentally at the time would just come out. But I wouldn't often get like into fights with other people. It happened a couple of times, but not very much. But it would more, I'd just like punch stuff. And I think a lot of guys do that. It's a classic idea of like guys punching walls and stuff. I was that. I'd also punch lampposts and other or objects that would get in my way. But the point to all of this is that it's quite difficult often to spot when a guy is depressed or lonely or whatever, because it can kind of look like other things. Like for me, it was like, oh, he's drunk, so he's just being an idiot. Which perfectly happy people are also idiots when they're drunk. So the lines kind of get slightly blurred. Whereas I think for girls, and as I say, I'm certainly no expert in either of these things, but it's just my own feelings. I think they're probably better at having conversations when they're not feeling so good and speaking to friends. So, and quite frankly, crying, which I think is a real like, oh, if you see someone cry, there's something wrong. So, when a girl cries, if she's feeling upset or lonely, it's obvious you can kind of marry the two together. But if guys don't cry and the way they deal with it is by drinking or fighting or whatever it may be, that is more difficult to attribute to being lonely. You could just say, like I said, he's being an idiot or he's drunk or he's whatever. So those are my main thoughts generally on loneliness. Just a bit of a commentary. There's no real direction to it. But I thought what could be more useful is talking about what you can do. Firstly, what you can do personally if you're someone that feels quite lonely. But secondly, and I think something that's really not talked about, is what can you do to support a friend that's dealing with these issues? Starting off with what you can do yourself, if any of what I've said so far resonates with you and you think, I'm someone that I don't have anyone that I could talk to about a serious problem, or I have no close friends or whatever it may be. I think a really important thing personally is finding a purpose. And again, maybe this is more unique towards men, but it's just, again, my own experience. When I was going through that really tough time at university, what was at least the initial stepping stone, and I think is, to be quite frank, has carried on in different areas throughout kind of growing up a little bit, is finding that purpose, finding something to work towards and strive to do. So initially for me, it was that my university would put on these boxing nights where 10 or 12 people would all sign up, all amateurs, and they'd train for, how long was it, 8 weeks or so. And at the end, you'd fight one of the people you'd been training against. And this for me gave me a real goal, and I think also a physical activity that meant A, I was no longer punching lampposts, which is probably a good thing, but B, I had something to work towards. And I don't I don't know the science behind it. I say that probably 3 or 4 times a show, but I remember the process of that. Maybe it's just having a distraction from the sadness and the loneliness, but I really carried that through to where I am now. I think when I see myself slipping into like being in a bad headspace, which of course happens from time to time, I think anyone that says they're perfectly happy all the time is probably lying, or if they're not, that's great. But when I feel myself feeling a bit down, it usually means I'm not working towards anything. So, and that's why one of the things I'm doing right now is this podcast. It's something that my mind focuses on, and it keeps me very stimulated. So I think that's a really, really important thing. If you're someone that's struggling, to find something that can get you up each day. And like I say, for me, it was this training initially. I think having something physical is an extra on top of that. It would be 5 days a week of sparring and physical training. And I remember I loved it. I went to every single class and ended up winning the fight, which was also quite nice. I don't know how happy I'd have been afterwards if I'd lost, but no issue. What really speaks to this for me is something I discovered when I was doing some research for this show. And it's this thing called men's sheds. And I'm not sure if it's just me that's not heard of this, but it sounds brilliant. It's essentially a place where men just get together and they, as far as I'm aware, just build shit, which I think is awesome. And it kind of speaks to part of the solution. I think men like doing things rather than necessarily sitting down and talking face to face about issues they may be having. And this men's sheds place is just a place where guys go. They build sheds and other objects, and naturally conversations about this type of thing will come up. I think back to when I've discussed serious issues with my friends, and most of the time it comes up pretty organically when we're just doing something, whether it's playing a video game or watching American football. I think a lot of the really serious conversations I've had with my friends throughout my life have come on the back of doing something. So yeah, I think purpose, doing something is super important to helping you get out of feeling the way that you currently feel. The second thing I would suggest, and it's a little bit more tricky, is if you can, some form of therapy. Now, I think a lot of men, it's not a necessarily a situation that really lends itself to these issues that you want to talk about coming up organically. Sitting in a room with just someone else staring at them and having to talk, I don't think a lot of people would like to do. But again, speaking from personal experience and this time at university when I was struggling, with the help of a couple of my friends, I dragged myself to some therapy sessions, and it was, well, at the time it was very sad and there were a lot of tears. But looking back at it, it was a great thing for me, and it really helped me reframe a lot of the things that I was struggling with. And sure, it wasn't just loneliness, but it made me see issues that I thought this is something I can't get past. And rather than look at them from this point of view and kind of, I don't know, it just shifts the perspective slightly and you view the same problems very differently. And sometimes that's all you need to kind of be able to tackle them. Because sometimes you can get stuck in a rut with thinking this is never going to get better or whatever it may be. But the therapist, at least for me, was someone that really helped me reframe and rethink about how I viewed these problems. And eventually they got much better. So I would suggest that if that's an option that you can take, I'd look into it. It was great for me. Opening up more generally, I think, again, it's a really difficult thing to do. And it was something that I struggled with. When I did, it did feel like things were then starting to get better because it was kind of, I guess it's like with anything like alcoholism or something, or being a drug addict. It's the first step is kind of accepting there's a problem there. And I think by speaking to anyone, you're bringing those problems to light, which kind of identifies them as real rather than just in your head. I think speaking to the right people are great, but a lot of people are very ill equipped to respond to what you're saying. And for me, I had a couple of people who were awesome, and I don't know if they really knew why they were doing a good job at the time, but they really did smash it. Some people you'd open up to though, and even if they had all the good intentions in the world, they could make things a lot worse by accident. So I remember a conversation I had with someone, and I said, I've been struggling quite a lot recently with X, Y, and Z, and their response was something like, "Oh, well, there's people in the world that have it a lot worse than you." So, and I remember just thinking, "Wow, I get that. Doesn't really make me feel much better. Actually, makes me feel quite a lot worse because then I'm like, why am I sad? I shouldn't be sad, but I still am. It doesn't get the problem away." So what I'm trying to say is, if you can open up to someone around you, I think that's a great thing to do. I think you've got to accept that a lot of people will find it very difficult to handle the kind of conversation that you're trying to bring up, and they might respond in the wrong way. I'll get on to how potentially to respond in the right way in a second. The last thing I wanted to bring up as to what you can personally do if you're struggling is I think things actually have to get to a point where they really suck before they can get better. Now, if there's just a situation which is kind of bad, but you can kind of deal with it, then you might just push on. But if things get really, really, really bad, you can't get much lower. And I remember a couple of really, really distinct times for me where I was like, I really felt at rock bottom mentally. The only way is up at that point. Like, your back's against the wall. You just got to fight. And I think things getting so bad, you know that you've got to make some changes. And that can actually be the start of a journey to feeling really good. So I think if you're someone that feels like everything is terrible, and I get that feeling, I think it's okay to be at that spot because that's the start. And quite often, I think you can only improve by being in a really terrible position. So I always say keep positive. You're probably not feeling too positive right now, but it's okay to be that way, is what I'm saying. And it's somewhere where you can work from. You can start building up the blocks of feeling better. The section I wanted to cover last is what you could do if you have a friend that feels this way and how to really respond to their feelings. I'll play out an example. So let's say I've got a friend and they come up to me and they say, Jamie, look, I've been having a really tough time. X, Y, and Z is happening. I'm feeling really down. What I would typically do, and I think is quite a natural response, and sometimes I still do it, is I'd try and fix everything right there and then. So I don't know, this person, let's say they're feeling down about their weight, they feel like they're not in good shape. I'd say, look, let's go to the gym. I've got a plan. I will do this. Bam, bam, bam. I'm trying to fix it. I'm trying to sort the problem. What's actually a better thing to do, at least initially, when someone opens up, which can be quite a vulnerable moment for them, is what Simon Sinek, who is an author and a speaker, has described as sitting in the mud with them. So rather than just try and sort what the problem is, just be there and be in that kind of difficult moment with them and be present and listen to them and let them say what they need to say and be supportive. I think to start off with trying to fix things, it's not an immediately productive thing to do. And while it seems a bit counterintuitive, especially if it's someone you care about and you love, you want to help them and fix them, but the first thing you've got to do is just be there and listen to them. So that's what I say is the most important thing to do. I think for men, talking to other men, so let's say this person that's opened up to me is a guy, it's quite difficult, or it's not common really, for men to show any kind of affection towards each other. You think of women talking to women, they're much more often will say like, I love you, or, you know, you mean a lot to me, you're a great friend. Guys don't really say that to each other that much. And I think that kind of perhaps goes back to traditional feelings of what masculinity is. It's a whole other thing. But something that, again, me and my friends have developed quite well is we now always kind of, you know, we say we love each other all the time. And I think it's super, super important because when the worst things happen, and they do, when people take their own life because things have got so bad and they can't cope anymore, what you would give to then tell that person they were loved, or try and do something that could prevent it, you would do anything to get that opportunity again, but you can't after it's happened. So, and I'm not saying to always think in terms of, I'm going to say this because I don't want the worst to happen. I think it's just a great thing to do generally, but yeah, it's just a way of perhaps viewing it. And I think it's super, super important. And something that, again, me and my friends do a lot more these days, we give each other hugs. Like, again, it's not super, guys don't really hug each other that much, but I don't know. I think it's a nice thing to do. Give your friends a hug, just see what happens. They may be freaked out, but then that would be kind of funny anyway. So yeah, give your friends hugs, tell them you care about them, tell them they mean a lot to you, and tell them that you love them, because chances are if they're your friend that you do, and it will probably mean quite a lot hearing that, especially if you've not said it to them before. I think kind of summing up all this, it's a really difficult issue. It's difficult if you're the person that's struggling. It's difficult if you've got a friend that's struggling. I think patience is a really key thing on both sides. But for me, the reason that I've decided to do this episode is I just think, if someone listening has a situation like this or it's them, things will improve, things can improve, and just hang in there. If you're someone, like I say, that's feeling this way personally, try and find something that gets you up in the morning, whether it's going to the gym or a project you want to start or something. Just purpose is super, super important for guys, I think. If you're a friend of someone that you think struggling, if you can just sit in the mud with that person, if they speak to you, then they'll be really grateful. They'll think you're a great listener if you can just be there with them. And honestly, it's been a real privilege over the last 2 or so years having a number of friends that I'm close to open up to me and feel comfortable talking to me. So from that experience, if you're someone that has a friend open up to them, while it's upsetting that you have a friend that's struggling or got an issue, you will feel so good that they chose you as someone that they could speak to about whatever it is. It really is it's a really, really nice feeling because they chose you to be someone to speak to. It's a real honor. So if you can put yourself in a position where you can be receptive to these quite honestly difficult conversations and very serious conversations, it's very rewarding. And the most rewarding part is seeing, a friend or whoever it may be then start to improve off the back of maybe partly a conversation they've had with you, but just seeing them improve afterwards. So yeah, I think that's about it for today. I hope there's some useful bits in here for someone listening. Thank you for listening. Like I say, I hope it's good. If you have liked it, please like, share, all that good stuff. I gotta maybe make scripts to sum that up a bit better. But yeah, I really like talking about these things. I love learning more about these things. And if there's any topics you think I should cover or look into, then please drop it in the comments on YouTube or just reach out to me. I know most of the people that listen to this show are people that I know. So just drop me a message and we'll figure it out. There'll be some good stuff coming soon. I've got a couple more 2-person conversations coming up over the next month or so. So that should be really interesting. And it would also be nice to not hear myself speak for the entire time when editing, because that is the worst thing in the world, hearing your own voice. Anyway, thank you so much for listening. Have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you next time.